The sun had barely cleared the red cliffs when whispers spread through the small frontier town of Dustwater Gulch. Folks leaned against wooden railings, chewed on straw, and murmured the same name that always drew curiosity and caution alike: Kael Redhawk. He was an Apache warrior who'd walked away from his tribe years ago and settled on the edge of town, in a small, wind-battered cabin that overlooked the barren plains. No one knew why he'd stayed near white folk when he clearly didn't trust them. He barely spoke, didn't drink, and kept to himself. But he worked hard, fixed fences, broke horses, and always paid what he owed in silence. The strangest thing about Kael wasn't his quiet nature or the scars that ran like rivers across his chest. It was that every woman who ever tried to win his heart failed. In a place like Dustwater Gulch, where men were either drunk, dead, or dangerous, Kael's quiet strength had drawn women like moths to a flame. Some came with food, others with kindness. One even offered him land if he'd marry her. But Kael refused them all, politely, firmly, and without explanation. He didn't flirt. He didn't entertain. He simply looked them in the eye, gave a slight shake of the head, and walked away. And that was enough for rumors to grow wild. Some said he'd taken a vow of silence after a great betrayal. Others claimed he was already married to a spirit woman of his tribe, bound by ancient oath. A few swore he carried the ghost of a lost lover in his heart, and no living woman could ever reach him. Whatever the truth was, Kael Redhawk had become the town's mystery and its obsession. Then, one late autumn afternoon, a stagecoach rattled into town carrying a woman who would turn that mystery on its head. Her name was Elara Wynne, 30 years old, dressed not in lace and silk like most ladies, but in a weathered brown riding coat, boots dusty from the road, and eyes that didn't belong to a drifter. They were sharp, the kind that noticed everything. She wasn't beautiful in the delicate sense, but there was something arresting about her. Confidence, quiet sadness, and the kind of strength only pain can forge. When she stepped into the saloon that day, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even Sheriff Cole looked up from his whiskey. "Ain't seen you round these parts, miss," he said, his tone half curious, half wary. "I'm looking for a man," she replied evenly, her voice carrying through the saloon. "Name's Kael Redhawk." Every head turned. The piano player stopped playing. Someone coughed. "Ma'am," a miner snorted, "you don't want nothin' to do with that one. Apache don't talk, don't drink, don't take kindly to company neither." Elara only smiled faintly. "That's all right. I'm not here for company." Within the hour, she was seen walking down the dirt road toward Kael's cabin. The wind was rising, carrying red dust through the air, but she walked on, determined, fearless. Kael saw her long before she reached his porch. He was cutting wood behind the cabin, shirtless in the heat, his skin marked with tribal ink and scars that spoke of battles no white man could imagine. When she stopped a few feet away, he didn't move. He just looked at her, quiet, assessing, the way one studies a stranger who's about to cross a line. "You're Kael Redhawk," she said. He gave a single nod. "I came to ask you something." He said nothing. "Every woman in this town tried to make you theirs," she continued, her tone steady, "and you refused every one of them. I don't blame you, but I came to ask if you'll marry me." The axe fell from his hand, burying itself in the dirt. For a long, breathless moment, Kael stared at her, not with anger or disbelief, but with something unreadable. His lips parted, then closed again. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and rough, as if unused to words. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I have my reasons," she said softly. "And I believe you do too." He studied her a moment longer. The wind howled through the canyon. Then Kael turned and walked back into his cabin without a word. But that night, the lights inside his home stayed burning until dawn for the first time in years. Something had changed. something no one in Dustwater Gulch could yet understand. Morning came slow to Dustwater Gulch. The air was cold, the ground brittle from night frost. Smoke curled from a single chimney at the edge of town, Kael Redhawk's cabin. Inside, Kael sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. The rhythmic scrape echoed against the wooden walls. Across from him, Elara Wynne stood near the window, her hat resting on the sill, eyes tracing the barren plains beyond. Neither had spoken much since the night before. She had knocked again after sunset, and though Kael rarely let anyone inside, he had opened the door without a word. Something in her eyes, not fear, not pity, had stopped him from turning her away. Now in the dim orange glow, she finally spoke. "You didn't answer me yesterday." Kael looked up slowly, the knife glinting in the light. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't. Then answer me now." He studied her again, the confident set of her shoulders, the faint scar above her brow, the weariness behind her calm. She wasn't a woman looking for love. She was a woman carrying purpose. "Why?" he asked, voice low and rough. "Why would a woman like you ask to marry me?" Elara didn't flinch. "Because I need the truth. And you're the only man who can give it." Kael's hand paused mid-motion. The blade stopped against the whetstone. "Truth about what?" She turned to face him fully. "About a man named Lieutenant Warren Hawley." The knife dropped. Kael's expression changed, not much, but enough for Elara to know she'd struck a nerve. The faint tremor in his jaw, the dark flicker in his eyes, they told her she was right. "You know him," she said softly. Kael's voice came like gravel. "He's dead." "I know," Elara replied. "And I know he died during the Sand Hollow massacre, the one blamed on your people." Kael said nothing. His silence was heavier than words. Elara stepped closer, the firelight catching her eyes. "That massacre took my brother's life," she said. "Or at least that's what they told me. But before he died, he sent me a letter. Said things weren't what they seemed. Said there was one man I had to find if I ever wanted the truth." Her gaze locked with his. "Your name was in that letter, Kael Redhawk." The wind outside moaned through the cracks in the cabin. Kael stared into the fire, the flames flickering like ghosts of the past. He finally spoke. "Your brother, Warren Hawley. He was no enemy of mine." Elara's breath caught. Then what was he? Kael rose slowly, his shadow stretching tall across the wall. "He was a man trying to stop the killing. He came to our camp with a white flag, warning us of the ambush. He died protecting our women and children, not killing them." For a moment, the room was silent except for the crackle of burning wood. Elara felt her knees weaken. The story she'd been told her whole life, that her brother died in battle against savages, shattered in a single breath. She steadied herself. "Then why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why let the world think your people were guilty?" Kael's eyes darkened. "Because speaking truth to men who've already written their version of it is like shouting into the storm. No one listens. They only hang the messenger." He turned toward the window, his profile lit by the glow. "Your brother saved my life. He told me if ever his sister came searching, I'd know her by her courage. Said she wouldn't believe the lies, not if she looked me in the eyes." Elara's throat tightened. "He said that?" Kael nodded once. "And now here you are." For the first time since she'd arrived, Kael's eyes softened, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the warrior's armor. Elara took a slow step forward. "Then my proposal still stands." Kael looked confused. "After what I've said?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because if the world won't listen to the truth, then maybe it'll listen if it comes from husband and wife, one Apache, one white. Maybe that's the only way to make them see." Kael studied her again, the firelight reflecting off her determination. "You would bear the burden of my name?" he asked quietly. "For a truth that could destroy yours? I would, she said, because my brother died for it. Outside, the wind calmed. Inside, Kael Redhawk reached for his coat and stepped closer to her. His voice was steady now. Then before the sun sets tomorrow, he said, you will have my answer. And when she looked into his eyes, she knew the storm she had walked into was far from over. The next day dawned gray and windless. Clouds rolled low over the desert like restless ghosts, and the sound of distant thunder echoed beyond the mesas. Elara Wynne stood outside Kael Redhawk's cabin, her hands folded tightly before her, waiting. She'd hardly slept. Every word Kael had spoken the night before played over in her mind. Her brother's name, the massacre, the hidden truth. She had come looking for answers and somehow found herself caught between guilt and revelation. Kael finally emerged from the cabin. His long black hair was tied behind his shoulders, and his bare chest bore streaks of dust and sweat from early work. He carried a water bucket from the well, set it down, and looked at her, not with suspicion, but quiet resolve. You still here, he said, his deep voice cutting through the silence. I said I'd wait, Elara replied. He nodded once. Then you deserve to hear what the world refused to. They walked toward the cliffs behind his cabin, where the land opened wide, miles of red rock and desert brush stretching to the horizon. A single wind-twisted tree stood alone near the edge, its roots gripping stone like a hand holding on to memory. Kael stopped there and gestured toward the valley below. That's where it happened. Sand Hollow. Elara's breath caught. The place was beautiful, but beneath the beauty she could almost hear the echoes of screams carried by time. It wasn't your brother's fault, Kael said quietly. Nor was it ours. It was greed. He crouched, picked up a handful of sand, and let it slip through his fingers. The army wanted our land. There's silver buried deep under this earth. Your brother found out. He warned us they were coming under false orders, that a traitor named Brigson had paid the soldiers to clear us out. Elara frowned. Brigson? He owned half the freight lines from here to Prescott. Kael nodded. He wanted the mines. He told the colonel the Apache were attacking settlers. It was a lie, but lies travel faster than truth. He paused, eyes narrowing with memory. Your brother came that night with white cloth tied around his rifle. He shouted for peace. He was struck down before he reached our campfire. The first bullet came from his own men. Elara felt her stomach twist. Dear God. Kael's voice was steady, but grief hid behind it. I dragged him from the fire. He was still breathing. Before he died, he gave me his badge. Said if I ever met his sister, I'd know her by her courage. From his pocket, Kael pulled a small tarnished object wrapped in hide, a soldier's insignia blackened by smoke. He placed it gently in her palm. Elara's fingers trembled as she stared at it. Her brother's initials, W.H., were faint but clear. You kept it all these years? Kael nodded. To remind me there was still good among men who called us enemy. For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert wind carried only the whisper of dust across the stones. Then Kael straightened. Now you know why I refused every woman. Elara looked up at him, confused. Because of my brother? Because of what his death taught me, Kael said. Women came with kind eyes and gentle words, but all they wanted was to tame the savage, to polish the Indian into something presentable for town gossip. They didn't want me. They wanted the story that came with me. His gaze met hers, steady, piercing. You're the first woman who didn't ask what I was. You asked why I am. Elara's eyes softened. And your answer? Kael stepped closer, his voice dropping. My answer is this. I've lived with guilt I didn't earn, carried blame I couldn't wash away. Every day I refused love because I thought I didn't deserve it. Until you came with your brother's courage and asked for a truth no one else dared face. The silence between them deepened, heavy with emotion. Elara felt tears rise but fought them back. I don't want your pity, Kael said gently. If I accept your proposal, it's not for peace or redemption. It's because your brother's blood binds us to the same truth. Elara stepped forward, holding the insignia against her heart. Then let it bind us. Kael's hand brushed hers, calloused, warm, uncertain. For the first time in years, he didn't pull away. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Thunder rumbled far off. Kael glanced toward the storm. There's something you need to see before I give my answer, he said. Something buried beneath the ashes of Sand Hollow. Elara met his gaze, her heart pounding. Then take me there. Kael Redhawk nodded slowly. At dawn, and as lightning flashed over the cliffs, Elara Wynne knew that whatever truth lay waiting in that cursed valley, it was about to change both their lives forever. Dawn crept across the desert, pale and cold. The storm had passed, but a faint mist clung to the ground like the memory of sorrow that refused to fade. Elara Wynne rode beside Kael Redhawk in silence, their horses' hooves soft against the cracked earth. Neither spoke for miles. The land stretched out in endless shades of red and gold, broken only by dry riverbeds and scattered bones of forgotten camps. Kael rode slightly ahead, his long black hair damp from the morning dew, his bare chest streaked with dust and rain, the beads of his tribal necklace glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. Finally, they reached the valley, Sand Hollow. It wasn't much now. Just a field of burnt stones, shattered wagons, and twisted iron half buried by the wind. But beneath that silence, Elara felt something heavy, an echo of screams that time hadn't quite buried. Kael dismounted and tied his horse to a bent post. This is where your brother fell, he said quietly, and where everything changed. Elara stepped down slowly, her boots crunching on blackened earth. She could smell the faint trace of charred wood even after all these years. How long ago? She asked. 7 winters. She ran her fingers along a rusted wheel rim half sunk in sand. And you come back here often? Kael shook his head. Never, not until now. He walked to a patch of ground near a cluster of stones, carefully arranged, not natural. Kneeling, he brushed away the dust, revealing a small wooden carving beneath. It was shaped like a hawk with broken wings. This, he said, voice low, is where I buried the truth. Elara knelt beside him, her heart pounding. What truth, Kael? He stared at the carving for a long time before answering. Your brother wasn't the only one who died that night. My wife did too. The words struck like thunder. Elara froze. Your wife? Kael nodded slowly. Her name was Mara. She was from my tribe. Strong, kind, she believed peace with your people was possible. The night before the soldiers came, she told me she was with child. We thought it was a sign that new life could bridge 2 worlds. His hand trembled as he lifted the carving. But when the army attacked, she refused to run. She tried to protect the women and the children. A stray bullet found her. I held her as she died. Your brother, he tried to save her. He carried her to safety before the flames took the camp. Elara's breath hitched. He saved her? Kael nodded. He tried. He was hit before he could reach the canyon. He made me promise to tell his sister the truth, that the war she was told about never happened. Only a slaughter born of greed and lies. He turned toward her, eyes dark with years of grief. But I couldn't. Every time I saw a white face, I saw the fire, the bullets, the loss. I refused every woman who came near, not because I hated them, but because I feared what their love might cost again. Elara's voice broke softly. You loved her deeply. Kael's jaw tightened. I buried my heart here with her. But when you came, speaking of your brother, You carried her courage and his truth. It was as if both of them had sent you to finish what they couldn't. A tear slipped down Elara's cheek as she knelt beside him. Kael, I didn't come here for forgiveness or pity. I came because I needed to know what kind of man my brother trusted with his last breath. Now I do. He met her gaze, his eyes like fire beneath the shadow of his hair. You came for truth, and you found pain. I found purpose, she whispered. And maybe that's what both our dead were trying to give us. The wind stirred, lifting the ashes around them into a ghostly dance. Kael reached into the ground beside the carving, digging carefully until his fingers struck something solid, a small bundle wrapped in deerhide. He handed it to Elara. Inside was a folded letter, its edges charred but the writing still legible, her brother's final words. Elara's hand shook as she unfolded it. The ink was faded but clear enough to read, "If you find Kael Redhawk, trust him. He carries truth heavier than any man should. Tell him I forgive the world that broke us, and I hope he finds peace in yours." Tears streamed freely down her face. She pressed the letter to her heart. Kael rose and looked toward the horizon, the morning sun casting long shadows over the ruins. "I will take you back before nightfall," he said. "You've seen what you came to see." But Elara shook her head, standing tall beside him. "No, you promised me an answer. And I want it here, where truth was buried." Kael Redhawk turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The desert wind fell still, and as their eyes met, he said, "Then here, among ashes and ghosts, I will give you one." The silence of Sand Hollow stretched long after Kael Redhawk's words faded into the wind. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, yet the valley still felt cold, heavy with the weight of memory. Elara Wynne stood near the small stone mound where Kael had buried his past, her fingers tracing the edge of the charred letter. Her brother's words still echoed inside her, forgiveness, truth, peace. But as she turned toward Kael, she saw something else in his eyes, something deeper than grief. "You said you would give me my answer here," she reminded softly. Among the ashes, Kael's jaw flexed. "I did." He turned from her, walking toward the cliff edge overlooking the vast desert. His long black hair moved with the wind, beads and feathers swaying like whispers of ghosts. His broad shoulders gleamed under the sunlight, scarred, powerful, and marked by years of battles fought in silence. "Every woman I refused," he said at last, "came with good intentions. They wanted to heal me, tame me, or make me forget. But forgetting is not peace, Elara. It's surrender." Elara took a slow step closer. "And what am I?" Kael turned to face her. His dark eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "You're not trying to fix me. You came here ready to carry the same truth I carry, even if it burns you too." He took a deep breath, his voice low. "That's why I refused every woman. Because none of them carried the courage your brother spoke of. None of them looked me in the eye and saw a man instead of a monster." The words struck her heart. She tried to hold his gaze, but tears blurred the edges of his face. "Kael." He stepped closer until the space between them vanished. "I buried my wife, my child, and my people's name here," he said. "I swore I'd never open my heart again. But when you came, carrying his letter, his voice, his truth, it was like the dead whispered that it was time." Elara's lips trembled. "Time for what?" "For me to keep my promise." He reached into the pouch at his belt and pulled out a small, braided cord made of leather and turquoise beads. "Before she died, Mara told me that love is not meant to be buried, only carried by another when the heart grows too heavy." I thought her words died with her, but now I know. She meant you. Elara shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "Kael, you don't owe me anything. I didn't come here for love?" He finished quietly. She hesitated. "For redemption." Kael smiled faintly, a rare, soft curve of his lips. You'll find neither without love. He took her hand gently, placing the turquoise cord in her palm. This belonged to Mara. It was meant for the child we never met. But perhaps it was meant for you all along. The gesture broke something inside her. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks as she looked at the necklace. Old, sacred, beautiful. Kael, she whispered, voice shaking. Why me? After all these years, why accept me when you could have? Had peace alone? He looked out across the valley, his face carved in shadow and light. Because you came not as a savior or a lover, but as a bridge between two worlds that hate each other. You came for truth, not for comfort. My people believe when the heart finds its echo, the one soul that carries the same wound, that union heals what time cannot. He met her gaze again. You are that echo, Elara Wynne, the only woman who carries the pain of both sides, the only one I cannot refuse. The wind rose, swirling ashes into a golden storm around them. Elara stood still, her heart pounding, tears mixing with dust. After a long moment, she whispered, If you accept my proposal, Kael, it won't be easy. The town will call me a traitor. They'll call you worse. Kael nodded. Let them. I've lived through names meant to break me. None ever did. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but sure. You wanted an answer. This is it. Then, with a voice steady as the earth beneath their feet, he said, Yes, Elara Wynne, I'll marry you. The desert fell silent. Only the wind bore witness to the moment, the union of two broken souls, who found in each other the truth that neither world would ever accept. Elara looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. Then let this valley see what peace really looks like. Kael smiled, small, tired, but real. Peace looks like you. As they stood together among the ashes of the past, the first eagle of the morning soared above them, a lone shadow in the golden sky, circling the valley where love had once died and been reborn again. The desert had a strange silence that night. The wind didn't whistle, the coyotes didn't cry. Even the cottonwood stood still as if waiting. Over the horizon, a blood-red moon rose above the buttes, painting the sand and stone in the color of old wounds. Kael Redhawk sat cross-legged before a dying fire, his eyes locked on the horizon. His broad chest gleamed in the dim light, muscles tensed, every breath controlled like a warrior preparing for a final stand. The firelight caught his tribal jewelry, beads and feathers that shimmered like ghosts of his ancestors. Elara Wynne stood a few paces away, her hands trembling around the locket she had carried since childhood, the one she had learned once belonged to Kael's sister. The revelation from the graveyard still echoed between them. You should have told me, she whispered, voice breaking. Kael didn't move. You wouldn't have stayed. You don't know that. He turned then, his dark hair swaying across his shoulders. Every woman who's tried to know me runs when she learns the truth. They saw the warrior and not the blood he carries. Elara took a slow step toward him. And what blood is that? Kael's eyes lifted to the moon. My people's death runs through me. I carry it, every scream, every fire, every face. Your army took them. And yet, his voice cracked. Your brother saved me. The same brother who died wearing this. Elara's knees went weak. My brother saved you? Kael nodded slowly. He found me half dead near Salt River, hid me in his camp. Fed me, he said. One day, you'll repay this with mercy, not vengeance. Then I saw him die when your cavalry burned the last Apache village. His hand trembled as he stared at the flames. That night, I buried him beside my sister, and I swore no woman with your people's name would ever reach my heart again. The silence stretched between them like a wound that refused to close. The moon climbed higher, glowing crimson on their faces. Elara's voice broke the stillness. So when I came to you, you saw her, your sister. He exhaled hard, pain flickering in his eyes. At first, yes. You had her spirit, her defiance. But then I saw you were different. You didn't want to save me, Elara. You wanted to understand me. A tear slipped down her cheek. You're wrong about one thing, Kael. Your blood doesn't carry death. It carries survival. It carries strength. She knelt in front of him, eyes never leaving his. And maybe your sister sent me here to remind you that love isn't betrayal. Kael's breath caught. His hand rose slowly, hesitant, trembling, until his calloused fingers brushed her cheek. You shouldn't forgive what my people lost, and you shouldn't bury what your heart still wants, she said softly. The fire snapped, a single ember rising between them like a spark of fate. He leaned closer, voice low and raw. If I let you in, the whole town will turn on you. She smiled faintly through tears. They already have. That broke something inside him. The walls built from pain, guilt, and old vows. Kael took her face gently in his hands, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw. The warrior who had once turned away every woman, who had stood against bullets and ghosts, now stood defenseless before her dot when he kissed her. It wasn't passion. It was release. The weight of generations lifted, the whisper of forgiveness carried by the desert wind. The blood moon hung above them like a silent witness as two lost souls, one born of conquest, one of regret, found peace in the ashes of history. When they pulled apart, Elara rested her head against his chest. What happens now? She asked softly. Kael's gaze turned to the horizon where dawn was beginning to break. Now, he said, I stop running from ghosts and face the living. And for the first time in years, Kael Redhawk smiled, not as a warrior, not as a survivor, but as a man finally free. The dawn over Dustwater Gulch came soft and golden, washing the desert in hues of fire and honey. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it a calm the town hadn't felt in years. But when Kael Redhawk and Elara Wynne rode in side by side, him on his painted horse, her on her pale mare, every man, woman, and whisper in that town froze. The Apache who had turned away every woman in 3 counties now rode beside one. And not just any woman, Elara Wynne, the outsider who'd once been shunned for daring to speak to him. Sheriff Cole stepped out of the saloon, his hand shading his eyes from the light. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, jaw slack. He finally said yes. Kael dismounted first, his long black hair swaying over his shoulders, the tribal jewelry around his neck catching the sun like small embers. He offered his hand to Elara, and when she took it, the town gasped as if they'd witnessed a miracle. Someone in the crowd shouted, Redhawk, you turned down every woman from here to Prescott. Why her? Kael's gaze swept across the faces, some curious, some angry, some afraid. His voice carried, deep and calm like thunder rolling over canyon walls. Because she carries the heart of a man who once saved mine. A hush fell. Elara's breath caught as Kael stepped forward, his eyes soft but burning. Years ago, when the soldiers came to wipe out my people, I would have died by their bullets. But one man, one white soldier, pulled me from the fire and hid me. He said, someday, show mercy to the next soul who looks at you without hate. He looked back at Elara. That man was her brother. He gave his life to protect both our worlds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Cole lowered his head, understanding dawning slow as sunrise. Kael turned to the people, his voice gaining weight with every word. I refused every woman because I thought love was betrayal. I thought taking any of your hands meant forgetting my people. But when I saw her, I saw the same courage that saved me once. She didn't come here to own me or to tame me. She came to heal what war tore apart. Elara's eyes shimmered, tears glinting in the morning light. An old rancher at the back spat into the dirt. "And what makes you think we'll accept that, Redhawk?" Kael stepped closer, his shadow long and defiant. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I didn't come for your approval. I came to keep a promise, one made in blood, and repaid with mercy." Then he turned to Elara. The town held its breath as he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden hawk, the same token he had once placed on his sister's grave. He pressed it into her hand. "My people believe the hawk carries the souls of the brave," he said softly. "And you, Elara Wynne, have the soul of both worlds, the courage of yours and the spirit of mine." Her voice shook. "Kael, I don't need anything but you." He smiled faintly, a man who had known loss now daring to love again. "Then you have all of me." The crowd was silent. Some looked away in shame. Others nodded, understanding something they never had before. For the first time, the line between the Apache warrior and the settlers blurred, not erased by power, but by choice. When Kael and Elara walked toward the edge of town, hand in hand, the sheriff called after them, "Redhawk, where will you go?" Kael turned his head just enough for the wind to catch his words. "Anywhere peace still has a chance to live." And with that, they rode toward the horizon, two silhouettes against the blazing sun, bound not by blood, but by forgiveness. Behind them, Dustwater Gulch remained still, a town changed forever by a truth no one had expected. He hadn't accepted her out of love alone. He'd accepted her because she was the living promise of mercy, the only one who could remind him that sometimes even the fiercest warrior must learn to forgive, and that was the reason that shocked them all.